Hi, this is Rutger from River, and I'm going to show you how to assemble a Nucleus DIY kit. The kit contains a front panel for the Nucleus, a Nucleus circuit board, and a set of components. In the components you'll find 6 of these mini jack sockets with washers and hex nuts. You'll find 2 knobs, a small one and a larger one that consists of a body and a cap, a brass standoff with 2 screws, a Eurorack power connector, a 3-way slide switch, 3 push button switches with black round caps, a 100K and a 20K multi-turn trimmer, 2 potentiometers with a D shaft that combine with the knobs, and 2 potentiometers with a knob shaft. They don't need any knobs to control them. So before you start handling the circuit board, I advise to take precautions for electrostatic discharge. So you don't discharge any static electricity through the sensitive components on the board and possibly damage them. And when you have a look at the board, you can see these are the small surface mount devices that are already on there. Please try to avoid them as much as possible with this, with the soldering iron especially, because you don't want to accidentally desolder them or add any connections that are not supposed to be there. So on the front side you can recognize these 2 electrolytic capacitors, the spots for the frequency and the resonance knob, the spot for the slide switch, the spots for 2 attenuator control knobs, the 6 mini jack socket places, the push button switch positions, and on the back side you will find the place for the power connector. Let's wait till the camera gets this. Yes, place for the power connector and for the 2 trimmers. So I assume you have the equipment and the knowledge to solder such small components in place. I personally use a heat-regulated, relatively fine-tip soldering iron, and the noise in the background you hear is coming from this small computer ventilator running on 12 volts that blows away the fumes of the soldering process. So I recommend you to start soldering the components in a very specific order. And the first thing to start with is the Eurorack power connector that goes on the back side of the circuit board. You simply put it in, turn over the board and solder on the front side. So the power connector is on now. The next step is to solder these 3 push button switches, and they go in a specific orientation, and you can recognize this small white clip which is only on one side of the push button, and that clip is supposed to point upwards on the circuit board to the place where the power connector is. So this one goes here, the other 2 go in the same orientation. They click in and make sure they're in straight and deeply, so they line up well with the front panel when you try to fit that, and apply solder from the back side. So now you can fit the 3 black round caps, and these caps have a slot which I found is easiest to have pointing on the side, so like this, and you can simply press them on, but that process is slightly easier when you also tilt them a little bit while pressing, so this kind of motion. It requires a bit of force, but be careful not to apply excessive force and break the head of the switch. So that looks good. The next thing is to solder the 3-way slide switch in place. You can put it in either orientation, it's symmetric. It goes here and clicks into place. and you can solder it on the back side, and make sure you also solder these larger clips, because they help to take the force and the strain on the switch when you move it a lot. So this light switch is in place now. The next thing to do is to put on the standoff, and the standoff comes on the front side of the circuit board, and the screw goes in from the back through the one hole on the top. You need a screwdriver, of course, to tighten it. It doesn't have to be extremely tight. That looks like this. And this supports a large portion of the front panel when it comes on. But the mini jack sockets do the rest of the supporting. So that's why I put them in. They have three pins, and two of them are very close together, and these closest pins should be pointing downwards on the circuit board. So I put them in, but I didn't solder yet, because I first want to make sure that they are properly aligned, because they support the front panel. So I put on the front panel. I don't attach it yet, but this is what I want to show you. Here you see a small gap, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. So that's why I recommend using the front panel now to help with the alignment of the sockets. So when you start wiggling these sockets a little bit, you'll find that the front panel can go down even further until it rests firmly on the square portions of the mini jack sockets. So here the gap is now closed. Make sure it's closed on the other side as well, and it is on the bottom as well. So this is the way you want to have the sockets lined up. And now I want to apply solder, but this is a little bit tricky because you want to apply it while holding the front panel in place. So I found a nice solution by doing it this way, having something to put your solder on, such that the wire can stick out in the air, and then hold the circuit board underneath and apply solder. And if you find it difficult to hold the boards together like this, it suffices to solder only a few joints, enough to fix the positions of the mini jack sockets, and then later finish without the front panel in a more comfortable position. So that's also what I'm going to do now. So the mini jack sockets are now properly in place, aligned with the holes in the front panel. So now it's time to put in the two multi-turn trimmers. And remember that they have different values, so that's why I show them. One of them is labeled 104, that's a 100 kilo ohm trimmer. The other is labeled 203, which is a 20 kilo ohm trimmer. So the 20 kilo ohm trimmer goes into the volt per octave socket. And make sure that you line up the trimmer head with the circle on the symbol on your circuit board. So you press it in, you bend the pins on the other side to keep it in place, and then apply the solder. And the same holds for the 100 kilo ohm trimmer, which goes into the tune socket. Also mind the orientation of the trimmer head, such that it lines up with the circle on the symbol. Turn over the board and apply solder on the other side. And after you've done that, you'll probably find you want to trim some excess leads of these trimmers with a wire cutter or something. So the trimmers are in place now. The final thing to do with the soldering iron is the 4 potentiometers. These two with a black shaft and the knob-like ending, they go into this bottom place close to the mini jack sockets, and they simply click into the holes but that sometimes becomes easier if you also apply a little bit of sideways force. And these with the D shaft go into these places for the resonance control and the frequency control. Also they click in, and now from the back side you can apply solder, and when you do so also solder these clips, because they help keeping the potentiometers in place when you apply the force of rotation. So the potentiometers are done now, and it's time to fit the front panel. You simply lay it on. Again, make sure that the gap between the panel and the sockets and the square portion of the sockets closes completely. That means it's in proper position. And then put the screw in on the top side. That goes into the standoff that you've mounted earlier. And put the washers and the nuts on the sockets. Now the nuts are all on, and I recommend that you tighten them by hand first. And for the last bit of tightening, you can use these kind of tools. I believe this is called a wrench socket. It may also have another name, I don't know that. You can leave out the wrench, you don't need that much force, so you can simply apply the force by hand. And I recommend to make something like this, a paper mold with a hole of this at the shape of the hex nut, so you can take one off and cut the circumference out. And that helps you to prevent any scratches on the paint job of the front panel when you apply force with this tool for tightening the nuts. And really do this, because it's a shame if you damage the front panel prematurely and don't have the fun of a smooth looking front panel for the rest of the lifetime of this module. So the front panel is now firmly attached. So the last thing to do are to fit these few remaining components. Knobs on the potentiometers. Before you do that, turn them completely counterclockwise and line up the white stripe of the small button, or the small cap, to the 0 indicator here. Simply press it on, and that's it. The other knob, the larger one, is a slightly different mechanism. It has this brass ring with 2 slots, and you can turn that ring with a screwdriver in the slot. I think they actually come with a very specific tool for doing this, but I found that a screwdriver and a pair of pliers works almost as well. So also here, line up the white stripe with the 0 indicator and turn the ring by the slots until you feel that the pot knob holds to the shaft. And then finish off with a pair of pliers to make sure that it stays in place. And the last thing to do is to fit the cap, and make sure you line up the white stripe again and press it on. And now your nucleus is done.